welcome Distinguished Toastmaster, District Chief Judge, David Gosnell.
Yay.
Thank you, Gene. Well, let me get my screen share set up here. I finally made it big. As Gene said, please chat any questions and we'll get to detail in just a minute, but it is contest season. All right. Exciting time of year. And you are the chief judge. Maybe not quite as glamorous as contest chair, contest master out in front of everybody. But as you know, you do a lot of very important things without which you couldn't even have a contest. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. You have really two primary goals as chief judge of your contest. One is that you have to provide the contest services that are needed to make it work: the judging, the timing, the ballot counting. And the second thing is you want to make sure that the contest is as fair as possible. And we're going to get into the details of those things, but those are your two real goals. I will say at this point, I've got several documents that are very close to being finished and this PowerPoint. So I'm going to ask Gene to email several documents to you, including this PowerPoint presentation, probably within the next couple of days. So you'll get it sometime this week. So you don't have to take a whole lot of copious notes because you'll be getting that stuff through email. Now, I have identified over the years as a judge in contests, chief judge several times, there's really three things that I found that are the critical success factors. If you do them well, then you're bound to have a good contest. One, of course, is you have to enlist and prepare your team. And as you probably know by now, the chief judge has to enlist more people for a contest than anyone else, because you've got to get the judges, timers, and the ballot counters. You also have to plan the processes and the details of what your team is going to do to make sure they get their work right. And if we all know with online contests, that's ratcheted up a couple of levels of difficulty. And you have to be able to resolve issues. You're not the only one, but you're a major person playing that role. So we are going to have tonight in this training 3 segments, one on each of these critical success factors. Hopefully each one goes 10 to 12 minutes, and then we'll have a short Q&A session for each one, rather than one big long Q&A at the end. So if you have a question about the first one, enlisting and preparing your team, go ahead and chat your question to Christine, and she will be curating those right after this first segment before we go to the second one. Hope that makes sense. You will see how it goes as we go. So let's get into the first one. Critical success factor number 1, enlisting and preparing your team. Now, I've done this before. I'm sure a lot of other people have, and you may be doing it right now. You need to get some judges and so forth. Well, send out an email. Send it to all the people in your club or your area, whatever your venue is. And you ask for judges. You ask for timers. You ask for ballot counters. When I've done this, I usually get back 1 or 2 people, say, okay, maybe I can do that. And that's about it. I wait a few days. I send them a similar email again. And maybe I'll get 1 more person. But I found in the past, if I do that for several weeks, I might get enough people, but it takes a long time and I found it to be difficult. But years ago, I learned that's probably not the best way to get volunteers. You have to ask individuals. Now, it's great to send out an email saying, we're going to have the contest, we're going to need these people. If you're interested, call me, but we'll be calling on people. And this is the process that I use. I learned it years ago. It's not original with me, but every time I've used it, it's always worked well for me. Maybe not perfectly, but pretty close. And I can give you plenty of examples. It is a little more effort up front, but I'll comment on that in a minute, because what it eventually does is save you time overall. And the most important part for me is if I do this right at the beginning, it prevents a whole lot of issues that I usually get if I use something else besides this process. So I highly recommend it. And I'm going to go through some details. Use it if it works for you. If you can find a better way, go right ahead. But your key thing is you're enlisting your team. This process isn't even as complex as that little diagram, but it contains 3 main steps. 1, you gather the information you need up front, all the information you can think of. And then you call your candidates and ask them to take on the role that you want them to take on. And you follow up with them regularly to keep them committed and make sure they're working as a team. Let's look at those three pieces. Gathering your information. You have several things that you want to know before you talk to people. One is, what people do I need? Well, if you're a club contest chief judge, you need 5 judges. You need 1 tie-breaking judge, 2 timers, and 2 ballot counters. And those numbers increase slightly if you get to the district. Instead of the 10 total people that I just named, you might have 13 at the district level. So you're around a dozen people depending on the level of your contest. So I usually put those in a spreadsheet so I can start tracking the information. You also need to know what the requirements of the position are. If I want somebody to be a judge, then I need to know that they can correctly use the ballot. They can judge a speech appropriately. So they have to have been in Toastmasters for some period of time so they can understand how to do that. They need to be able to fill out the ballot and get it to me and the ballot counters. Those are the basic requirements of the position. But then there are also some accountabilities, like in case of a judge, you're supposed to remain anonymous. So don't go around telling everybody that you're a judge. You also have to, in my case, I always ask them to look at some videos to do a little training and to practice a little bit before. So I ask them to do those things, and that goes along with your expectations. So those 3 things, requirements, accountabilities, expectations, they may sort of overlap some, but basically you want to know what you're wanting this person to do, what you're expecting them to do. You also want to say, or to write down what you're going to do to support them. So this is the other side of the coin. How are you going to help train them? What kind of information will you provide? What kind of communications will you provide? So make sure you document that. Yes, it'll take a little time to write these things down, but if you're fairly experienced, you could probably do all that in about 15 minutes, maybe 30. So it's not a long time. Once you've done all that, then you say, who are my potential candidates? If it's your club, then you take your club roster, take out the people who are not competing as contestants, take out the people who are not able to compete, like say Jean May as part of the trio, or someone who's an area director. And then that leaves you, here are the people I can call on. Of course, it doesn't just have to be your club or just your area. Now that we're online, you can actually get judges and so forth from just about anywhere, as long as they're a Toastmaster and they meet the qualifications otherwise. Now I'm producing a document, enlistment examples, and I've got some examples of all those specific things, and you'll see a little more detail of what I'm talking about when you get that file. So that's what I do at the beginning. What is it I'm really looking for? Who am I looking for? And so forth. And by the way, everybody knows people who are very, very experienced, and you can always call on experienced people and you'll probably have a good contest. But then the next time you probably call on those very same people. So it's a good idea to get some new people in as you go along as well. That way they get the experienced people can mentor them, and you build your bench strength over time and you get more and more people qualified. And then it's not so hard on the same people every contest season. Well, once you've written all that down, now it's time to call your candidates. I usually prioritize it based on the order I think that people would be most qualified, and I just start calling them. And when I call them, I've got 3 goals. The number 3 keeps popping up, right? And I have 3 goals for this. I want to exchange the information that I've just documented. And I want to, of course, ask them, some certain things to find out if they're really qualified, especially someone who's going to be a judge. Do they have the right experience? Do they know how to follow the process and so forth? So that'll take about 10 minutes. You want to ensure that there's clarity, that if they have any questions, you answer them. Or if you have any questions, that they answer your questions, and make sure you're both clear on what's going on here. And you want to get a commitment. So here's the steps. You call them up. Now, I know some people, especially these days, it's like, oh, it's so much faster just to send an email. I totally agree. It's a lot quicker. 30 seconds, I can send an email to somebody. But I know if I do that, I'm going to spend the next 6 weeks with calls and emails and more stuff, getting the information to them that I could have just done in 10 minutes on a phone call. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. So I highly recommend that you actually call people. Explain what you're trying to talk with them about. I want you to be a judge, a ballot counter, or whatever, and just ask for 10 minutes of their time. If they say no, then find out when you can call back. Then you engage in that discussion. You tell them, here's why I'm calling you. Here's what the job is about. Here's what I expect you to do. And you don't have to go through every bit of the detail, but at least hit the highlights so they understand what's going to be required. You know, you'll have to come to a briefing. You know, I want you to look at some videos, whatever it may be that you've already documented. And then you ask for a decision. Now, my advice to you is if they say no, don't try to talk them into it. I've done that in the past, talked people into it, and then I regretted it later because it just didn't work out well. They really didn't want to do it. If they say yes, then great, you're off to the races and you can start preparing. If they say, I'll think about it, just ask when you can call them back to get an answer. So I just go down through my list, talking to people one at a time and asking them these questions, giving them the information and finding out who's willing to do the job. The results that I found are that most of the time when I do this well, most of my work, by the time I finish these calls, it's done. There's very little that I have to work on, and contest season becomes much, much simpler from that point forward because they've already got most of the information. You also save time and confusion because they got the information to begin with and didn't have to wonder about it or go based on what some friend told them. And you usually get a better commitment. I usually find more people stay with it if I've gone through this process. So that's my process. And then once they say yes, I've got my people, I start following up. Usually the next day I will send them an email. This is where email does come in handy because I'm going to say, first of all, thank you very much for taking on this role. And I'm going to send them the forms they need. Some of them they'll need to fill out and I'll tell them when I need it back by. Here's some links to videos. Here's some links to documents that you need to read, like, for example, the rule book and so forth. So a lot of information can be exchanged through email once you've got the initial commitment. And of course, answer any questions as they come up because you do want to resolve issues quickly. That's the basics. I will tell you this, some people will say, you know, that just takes so much time. Again, it does take more time up front, but I found if I spend more time up front, as I go along, things get easier and easier, and it's much smoother all the way through the contest. If I do it a different way, which I have, it's easier at the first, but the longer I go along, the more questions I'm answering, the more email I'm sending, and contests become more stressful for me. So I prefer this process. You're on your own, it's your contest, you make the call how you're going to get your people. Now, Christine, what do we have in the way of questions? You're on mute. Okay, sorry.
So far, David, we have no questions.
All right. Anybody got a burning question right now they want to throw out? And we'll, if not, we'll go on to the next segment.
Yes. When do you disqualify somebody because they cannot judge somebody from their own club?
That's a good question, Jim. You definitely want to make sure somebody's eligible to do what you're asking them to do, right? So if you have, for example, you're talking about, say, a division contest or district contest. At those points, the judges may not be in the same club as any contestant. Of course, in the club contest, that's not a case. And in the area contest, that's not the case. So, but at division and so forth, you need to make sure that you know who the contestants are going to be before you start calling your judges. And usually you'll know by then. You may not know, but you'll have a good idea of some of them. And so once you get the area results in for a division contest, for example, then you'll need to go through your list and find out who's in which club. And that, as a division director, you should be able to get that information, of course, from TI's website. Does that answer the question? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you do wait until after the previous contest.
Yes, you pretty much, I mean, you can enlist judges, but you'll have to tell them if someone from your club wins is a contestant in the division contest, then I won't be able to use you as a judge. Now, if you already know that somebody's in a club and their representative, their contestant has not gone past the area, then you're okay. Of course, some people are members of multiple clubs, so you'll have to check every club that they're in. It's not just the club that contestant is representing. It's if they're in any club with them. But yes, you have to know that. And so it may be a week or less, depending on the scheduling of the contest, where you'll find that out.
I've also had the case where I wanted to equally balance the club representation of area contests so
Right.
that one club didn't have all the judges.
Right. And that's right. Their recommendation is one judge from each club. And then if there are fewer than 5 clubs, or you can't get all 5 clubs to participate, then you might have to go outside of your area to get the additional ones. Right. All right.
David?
Yes, Renee.
When you start out with asking for the judges, or you're the chief judge and you're going through the whole process,
Yeah.
when do you bring out the intent, especially with the international speech contest, when do you bring out, where it's after the club contest doesn't make that much difference, but once you get to the area and above, you have restrictions on who your judges can be. So when do you start looking or put that out there?
Well, what I try to do, that's a very good question, because I've had that issue. What I try to do is get the area, if I'm not the area director or division director, I try to get that person to supply me basically the role of that area or division, so I can see who has, not only in the same club, but who has achieved whatever levels. If there's any specific questions, you can always send, if you've got the person's, it's a little bit of a hassle, but if you've got their number and name and club, you can send that to Toastmasters, speech contest at toastmasters.org, and they'll tell you all the information that you can figure it out from. So yeah, that takes a little work, but you do that as soon as you can. If you know that you want them to be an international contest judge, for example, and I think it's at the area level or above, they need to have basically the same requirements as international contestants at that point. 6 CC speeches, if they've done that early enough, or 2 pathways levels. You have to check. Maybe you might even have to check with their VPE to find out. But yeah, you have to do a little investigative work to know it. And the sooner you do it, the better. Because then if you can get it before you even start calling people, then you don't even bother calling someone like that to be a judge. I usually, like, for example, when I was helping getting judges for the Division E contest this past fall, I was getting 2 or 3 of the judges to help them out. And so I asked, give me your list of members. And so I went through, and if someone didn't have any designation by their name that they had achieved any kind of level in pathways, or a CC, then I just didn't bother calling them, because I knew they would not qualify.
One thing that I've noticed, and it's very hard to check this unless the people like me and other people that have been in some of these roles have to be honest, because when it comes to, you have to, you can't be a judge if there's somebody from a club in as a contestant. It has to be stressed to some of the members that it's very critical that if I'm a division director and I know these rules, but I know also that so-and-so's in a club with me, but nobody else knows that. I've seen them where they've kept quiet and didn't find out until after the contest was over that they shouldn't have been. So
that scenario is never good. I agree. So you can trust but verify. You can always go, for example, to the trio and say, I need to have all the records, all the roll of everybody in the district, if you have to get it that far. So I can start checking those things, and you might have to go through Excel and start checking rows against other rows to see which ones are in the same clubs as others. So it might take a little investigative work. You might even want to enlist a person or 2 to help you with that, because that can be, yes, that's very detrimental. I totally agree with you. You don't want that to happen. So it's worth making the effort to make sure it doesn't. So there are ways to find out, though. All right, let me just go ahead and stop it here. If you have any other questions, again, please chat them to Christine, and she'll see if we can get them in toward the end. But we need to go on to the next segment so we can get this wrapped up by 7 o'clock. All right. Segment number 2 is about, share my screen. Here we go. critical success factor number 2 is plan your processes. You've got the people in place, hopefully by now, or once you do have them in place, you don't have to wait till then, but you're going to also plan your processes. And again, because they are online contests, this is more complex than it used to be. And unfortunately, that's the case. And it's actually causing some people to say, I'm not sure it's worth having a contest. You can get help with these things. So don't feel like you're out there on your own. But your processes are important. And here's a few overall things. Pay attention to details. If you are not a detailed person, and you probably know, I highly recommend that you get one of your judges or somebody else to work with you who is detailed and let them help you with the processes, because the devil's in the details. You really don't want him to come out. For example, you need, as you've heard 1,000 times, read the rule book. This is this year's. If yours doesn't look like that, if it doesn't have Aaron Beverly on the front, then you've got an old rule book. Get the new one from Toastmasters.org and read it. If you've read it before, I still recommend you go through and skim at least the change bars so you'll know what the differences are. And you have to refer to it regularly. During contest season, I'm referring to the rule book almost daily. People ask me all kinds of questions. And in a contest, you really need to know the rules, because people are going to look to you to be the arbiter of the rules. So get familiar with it. The more familiar with it you become, the easier it is to understand. TI has also produced, because there's nothing really about online contests in the rule book, they produced an online rule book, so to speak. It's not really a rule book, but there's some things in there they say it must be this way or it can't be that way. Most of them are recommendations or ideas for processes. It's pretty big too, and it looks like this. And I found it to be very enlightening and very helpful. You may not do everything exactly like they suggest, but that's fine. You can make up your own processes as long as they work and fit the rules. So I would strongly recommend you look at those two documents, the rule book and the online best practices. There are plenty of other helps from Toastmasters. There are plenty of other things that people know that can help you. So spend a little time reading, spend a little time watching videos, and educate yourself. You also want to coordinate with the other leaders. Contest chair and contest master have their own processes, and yours have to interact well with theirs. You can't do this in a vacuum. So make sure you're talking with them as you build your processes. Meet regularly, maybe weekly, to make sure everything is going well. And here's a critical point. I always try to rehearse every process during the briefings, during the judge's briefing, or the chief judge in this case, because a process that someone hasn't used before, very likely it won't work. You have to iron out the issues. You have to overcome the difficulties. People have to learn how to click on this or send that document or whatever they need to do. So make sure you rehearse. You may have to rehearse multiple times. Remember, the first time I was ever involved with an online contest, we basically had 3 or 4 rehearsals because there was so much that we didn't know. We had to figure things out, and there wasn't a lot of guidance back then. So rehearse your processes during the briefings, between briefings, extra briefings, whatever it takes. Whatever time you spend here will pay dividends during your contest. Now we're going through an example process here. I've chosen, by the way, I'm going to send you another document, recommended processes. Again, recommended just means this is what I do. There are plenty of other ways to do it. So no problem at all if you choose your own way. This is just things that I found that work for me. Several people have asked about sending and receiving ballots, the judges and the ballot counters and so forth, so I'm going to use that one. What I do is this. First, about an hour before the contest begins, if it's say at 9 a.m., at 8 a.m., I'll send an email to the ballot counters. And I will blind copy, BCC, blind copy the voting judges and the timers. And here's why I do that. Thank you, I don't need that phone call. Because I'm going to ask the judges and the timers to reply all at a certain point during the contest. If they reply all to that email, whatever they send will be to the chief judge and ballot counters, not to the other people because they were blind copied. If you don't know how this works, try it out. You'll see how it works. So send an email to the ballot counters, blind copy the voting judges and timers, and then ask them, when it's your turn to send in your time record, if you're a timer, or your ballot, if you're a judge, simply reply all, attach your document, and you're done. That's the process, basically. So therefore, the judges then, while they're doing the contest, they complete their ballot and they detach the official ballot at the bottom. I'm going to show an image in just a minute. Now you can do this two ways, according to TI. They can fill out the file. It is a fillable PDF, so they can fill it out electronically, put in a digital signature, which you can't just do in 3 seconds. It takes a little legwork up front if you've never done a digital signature. So they should do that in advance to make sure they're used to it. Or they can simply print it out, fill it out on paper like they would have years ago, and then tear off the bottom and take a photo with their phone and attach that photo. That's also acceptable. Those are the two basic ways. You might figure out other ones, but it's not really following the rules if you say, just put your first, second, and third in an email. Yes, we've all done that kind of thing, but it's going around what TI asks you to do. So I recommend one of these two things so you have the right record. Now, the judge's ballot looks like this, and you can see, it's hard to see all that detail, but down at the very bottom, all those blue spaces are fillable cells. So they can type in the person's names up here, all the contestants' names. They can put in their numbers that they're scoring with. They can add them up. It doesn't add them for them. It's not Excel, but they can add them up and put their numbers here if they want. And then they're going to come up, whatever process they use in their brain, they're going to come up with first, second, and third and type them in here. Then they put a digital signature here and type their name here. And again, they would need to practice doing that digital signature because it's a process to get that. So if you've never done that, it's sort of outside the scope today, but we can help you with that if you need it. So that's the way you would do it if you're using the fillable PDF. Again, they can simply print it and tear off that bottom part, cut it off, whatever, take a photo and send the photo. That's also acceptable. So they basically just attach their ballot to their email, hit reply all, and the chief judge, you, and the ballot counters will receive all those ballots by email. Now again, if you can see how if you try this out, if you rehearse it at your briefing, you can work out any issues and iron out any difficulties people are having and make sure that people are able to do this. Not the only way to do it. Although I would say this, I highly discourage having judges chat their information to you in Zoom because it is so easy to make a mistake and chat something to everyone. And if you do that, then everybody has your judge's ballot, and that's not a pretty picture. So I don't recommend that, but people do use something like Google Docs. They have people send it by text. Sure, other ways of doing it, I've just found that email works well for me. Now, the tie-breaking judge is supposed to only send their ballot to the chief judge. No big deal if the ballot counters also get it, but the tie-breaking judge's ballot, as you probably know, you only open if you actually have a tie in first, second, or third position. So if you had a tie at second place, for example, one of those is going to be second, and the other one's going to be third. And whoever's higher on the tie-breaking judge's ballot is second, whoever's lower gets third. You don't change first place if the tie is in second. So it just works simply as that. Look at the rules, it'll explain that. So you can have them send it just to you. So you can have a separate email, and that's probably a good idea because no one else is supposed to know who the tie-breaking judge is. So just send them a separate email, and then you get theirs back. So that's basically the process. It's worked well for me. It's simple. Most people can do email, and there's not a lot of technology required. You don't have to go on Google Docs and so forth. So it just depends on your people. If it works for you, great. And as I said, other approaches can work. Not the only way you can do it, but this is a good one that I found. Processes to consider. I would like you to pay attention to a few specific processes because they're worth thinking about. Protests. They happen rarely, but they do happen. And if you get a protest and you don't know how to handle it, that's not a good situation. Read the rule book to understand it. Now, let me ask this. Who knows who is allowed officially to actually file a protest? Unmute yourself.
Contestants or judges?
Right, contestants or judges, in other words, voting judges, not the tie-breaking judge. Contestants or voting judges can file a protest. No one else. Don't accept a protest from an audience member or even the contest chair. And who must they file that protest with? There are two options.
Chief judge or
Chief
contest
judge.
chair.
Chief judge and contest chair, right. So they're the only two who can accept the protest. And there are now 3 specific reasons for a protest. What are those?
Time dispute?
Nope.
Originality,
Originality in the case of international in this case, or anything really, originality.
eligibility,
Eligibility, and
referencing others' speech.
referencing another contestant's speech, or even they're just their name. It's actually worded a little bit differently in 2 different spots, but basically you can't reference another contestant's name or their speech during your presentation, or any contestant or judge could protest that. And you would probably lose that if you actually did that. That's new this year. So make sure your contestants know that. They should be told that at the briefing, if not well before. That came up also in a contest, and somebody said, but this is all, my speech is all about this contestant. Just change their name to Bob, okay? Don't let people know you're talking about another contestant. All right, so we've talked about that. You can file a protest. It has to be done before the winners are announced. You have to be able to communicate with your judges if it happens. And that means that generally what you'll do, if you're using Zoom, you'll have your sergeant at arms, your Zoom master, whatever you're calling them, move you and the judges to a breakout room. And the person who has been accused of doing something wrong gets to come in and defend themselves. Again, read the process in the rule book. It'll explain it, but make sure you're familiar with that. Eligibility, there really should never be a protest about that, because if you did the right job, you and the contest chair did verify before the briefings happen that everybody is eligible to speak and everybody is eligible to judge, you won't have to worry about eligibility, because you can say, I've already verified it, it's okay. So that leaves that one out. All right, the third one is hybrid contest. Not spend much time on this, but because we're having the district contest at the conference in early May, we're going to have a good number of people there. I don't know, 100 or however many we're going to have. We can't just tell all those people, go home and we'll have our contest now, and then you can drive back. Oh, and by the way, we'll do that 4 times this weekend. Totally impossible for most people to do that. So we're going to have a contingent of judges and other people there. So we're going to figure out how to work those rules and how to make sure it fits Toastmasters rules. We've been in contact with them and tried to get information back. But basically, we have to have a hybrid contest, which means we're going to allow divisions, areas, and clubs to have hybrid contests. Now, my understanding is that there's only a handful of clubs in the district who are even trying hybrid meetings at this point. And I certainly wouldn't start off getting into hybrid with a contest, because it's not easy. And so if you haven't already been doing it, it's not a good time to start. But you have to know the technology, you have to have enough experience to make sure you can take care of things, because things don't always go well. You have to have specific attendance rules. The contestants have to be online only. TI specifies that. So they can't be there in the venue with everybody else in the meeting room. And of course, your sergeant at arms, your Zoom master will have to be online, because they're going to have to be, there we go, online only. Most other people could be online or in person. You're going to have to work through the details in your specific situation. Got any questions about that? Let me know. I'll be glad to help you through that. I just don't expect many people to have to run into this. But we will be doing it at the district contest. It will be very interesting. All right, that's about processes. Obviously, I haven't covered every single process, all the details. Some things will be in the documents I'm sending you this week. But do you have any questions here? Christine, what's our question situation?
We had one question from the audience about using Ballot Buddy on Zoom for counting the ballots.
Yeah, Toastmasters or Toastmasters International says don't use an external ballot counting process. That's in the online best practices book. I can't tell you what page, but I've read it there a couple of times. I would concur with that. It's sort of easy, but I don't know. I sort of wonder about some of those things. So, you know, it's probably your call, but if you want to go by the rules, which you really should do, then I wouldn't use that. I would use a process like I had, you know, use the regular ballot and that kind of thing. So, but any questions or any particular reason why, give me a call and we can talk about it. That's just what Toastmasters says, don't do that. All right, that was the only question?
Yeah, that was the only question. And then we had a rebuttal to that. If they were to use the ballot buddy, how would the judges sign the ballot? And again, you're not using the official ballot, signed ballot. And I think it would be just awful if someone were to perhaps use the ballot buddy in a club contest and get all the way to division and have them disqualified for not having had a correct contest in the beginning.
Right, which is certainly not outside the realm of possibility. So yeah, you can protect yourself, you can protect your people in your contest if you simply do it the way Toastmasters tells you to do. And yes, it may not be quite as easy, but I mean, we're adults, we can figure it out. And if you need a little help, we've got people on Gene's team that can help with that. So yeah, I would recommend not doing that simply because Toastmasters says not to do that. So the letter of the law is important in most of these cases. Well, then I guess that leaves us enough time to go on to segment 3, our third and final segment. And this is where our grand prize winner will be announced. No, Jeanette, it won't be you. All right. Critical success factor number 3 is resolve issues. Now you can say, well, yeah, hopefully no issues come up. And yes, the more work you do up front, the less you're likely to have any issues, and hopefully the milder there are. And remember, there is a team of people. It's not just you as the chief judge. There, you've got the contest chair and contest master, one person or two. You've got sergeant at arms who should be familiar with the technology and help resolve things, you and other people. So play your part, let other people play their part and work together. So here's what I recommend. First, try to do your best to prevent issues. And again, as I said before, document and rehearse all your processes before the contest. Not only you, but the contest chair and the contest master working with the contestants. Make sure people have practiced all these things they're going to have to do. Then it becomes easier for everybody on contest day. Another good reason, by the way, to have your briefings on days before the contest gives you time to resolve issues. Doesn't mean you can't have your briefings right before, but you need to make sure you got the processes well done. Understand all the rules. Nobody understands all the rules. I certainly don't, but is understanding them as well as you possibly can, or at least where you can go in the rule book if you have to look at them on the fly. Saves a lot of time. So this is a good place for you, the contest chair and the contest master, to get together. If you have any other specific leaders you need in there, maybe a sergeant at arms who knows the technology, get together and brainstorm potential issues that you think might come up. And then what would we do to solve that problem? The more you do that in advance, the more likely you'll be able to resolve something pretty quickly or even prevent it from happening. And of course, you want to resolve them quickly so that you can go on with the contest, but you also want to resolve it fairly. Don't take a resolution that's going to disadvantage one of your contestants or advantage them. Let's look at some issues. Hopefully none of them are as complex as that chalkboard. But there are technical issues that come up. And of course, one big one is a lost connection. I've seen that happen. If the lost connection is experienced by a speaker in the middle of their speech, the best practices book says specifically that the contest chief judge, that's you, has to decide how much time is allowed for them to get back before you go on to the next contestant. I always take something like about 5 minutes. You can make it less, you can make it more. It is your call. But whatever you pick, I would let the contestants know in the briefing in it beforehand, so that they know that if they lose their connection, they only have an X amount of time to get back, because the implied result is if they don't, then whatever they've done up to the point where they lost connection, that's what the judges will judge based on. And it's not very likely that somebody's going to win a contest with only part of a speech. So make sure you know what process you're going to do to handle that. If it's a contest master, and I've seen this happen, the contest master, if the contest chair is working well together with them, they should be able to step right in. They should have the very same script. They should have all the information. And if the contest master loses their connection, the contest chair can step in and continue until the contest master gets back. And that's what happened. It worked quite well in the contest that I saw. If a judge loses their connection, in my case, I would tell the judges, you have to make your best judgment. If you lose your connection and you lose a significant amount of a person's speech because you don't see and hear it, then you have to recuse yourself. You have to decide whether you can honestly and fairly judge that contestant. And if you can't, then you need to tell me that you're recusing yourself. And this is a great place to have enlisted some backup judges. I didn't talk about that before, but one time I had a contest where I had a lot of judges. And so I actually enlisted several backup judges. They knew it was unlikely we would use their ballots, and we actually didn't. But if I lost a judge, I could just insert one of those backup judges. Now you could say, well, if I've got 7 judges, say a division contest, and I lose one, I've still got 6, I'm okay. Sure, but if you lose 2 or 3, then it starts to become less fair. But you have to decide what you're going to do if a judge loses their connection. Same thing with the timer. In my opinion, the timer should both be able to do all the things that either one's going to do. And the book specifies which things one should do, which things the other should do, but they should be able to back each other up. If the person giving the green, yellow, red signals loses their connection, the other one better be able to get right in so that that contestant doesn't lose time. And by the way, if either one of them loses a connection, the contestant, according to the book, automatically gets the extra 30 seconds, even if the other person steps in seamlessly and starts showing the colors. Number one, because the person speaking has probably pinned the first one, and if they go away, they may not be able to find the other persons very quickly, so they might need a little time to see them. So understand those issues, figure out what you're going to do, and there are probably other situations there that you'll need to handle. All right. What about poor audio or video? Seen that happen. The last spring's international contest, I think the last contestant came up and the contest master said, "Good morning, Bob." And Bob said he had no audio. And it took a while, went through several things. Finally, they had him just disconnect and reconnect. The problem magically went away. And in fact, that usually resolves most audio and video issues. Something happens in the Zoom connection. One way to prevent that, by the way, that I found that usually works pretty well is use a wired connection, if at all possible. People who are on Wi-Fi tend to have more of those slowdowns and problems with audio and video where you can't hear or see them properly. They get it mismatched. So if they can use a wired connection straight to their router, that's better, but it still might happen. But in general, log out and reconnect is generally going to be the solution there. Now there are personnel issues. Maybe all your judges are too young. Or maybe that's a good thing, I don't know. But the only personnel issue I can really think of is if somebody comes up at the last minute, maybe right before the contest, a day before, 2 days before, and says, "Oh, I have to go out of town. My boss is making me work, whatever, I can't be part of the contest." You may have to scramble. If you've gotten backup judges, not so bad. You can just pull one of them in and let them be the replacement. So that's the only personnel type of issue that I can think of. You might have others, but again, plan for those and decide what you're going to do. And finally, process issues. All your gears working together. Well, somebody might lose their form. They might not be able to find it online or something like that. Make sure that people know where the forms are and that they're there. You should have that resolved well before the briefings. Somebody might not follow the process right. The more you rehearse them, the less likely that is to happen, but that can happen. So they may not judge the right way, or they might not sign their ballot. You know, you don't really want that to happen. Encourage them to sign their ballots before the contest even starts. That way you don't have to worry about that. That's a lot of people have made that recommendation over the years. You don't really want to have unsigned ballots or where the name's not typed in or written down. Both of those need to be there, as well as first, second, and third, if you have at least 3 contestants. So don't go around that rule, just handle it in advance. All right, I've mentioned several documents, there's probably a couple more, and I will provide this PowerPoint presentation to everybody who's registered for this. Gene will be sending that out by email within a few days. But if you're watching this on video sometime later and you need documents, just email me at that email address, dgosnell@district48.org, and I will send them to you. And that, I believe, fulfills this third segment. And finally, any more questions? Time for answers, Christine.
Yes, we have questions. Can the judges be in the same place together for the contest?
My
Yes.
answer to that is a qualified yes. And here's what I mean. If you do that, you are automatically basically starting into a hybrid contest. You are having some in-person segment. And I would just tell you, and Gene and I and Freeman have talked about this at length, and we've tried to get as much information as we can from Toastmasters International, world headquarters. We at Sterling Toastmasters are going to attempt a hybrid contest, and we believe we can pull it off. We've got a lot of planning to go, but I know for certain when May comes and we have those contests at the district, we have to have hybrid contests. We will have judges probably in one room together, or at least some judges. Some could be online. That's why it's hybrid. You can have people all over the place. So my answer to that is you can do that. That's not against the rules as far as I can tell, and as far as I've been able to ask and investigate. So I would say a qualified yes. Just make sure you understand what you're doing and that you're clear how they're going to do their balloting. That's what I think. You might have a different opinion, but that seems straight off the top of my head.
Okay. Next question. I was told that the judges should make up a funny name and have no video.
Yeah.
How do they do that before entering the meeting?
Well, you can certainly rename yourself. If you look at your little rectangle, you go to the top right corner and click on that little ellipsis in the blue field. It'll say one thing you have an option to do is to rename yourself. I mean, you got to go to your rectangle, not somebody else's. So you can rename yourself in Zoom. I'm sort of assuming Zoom. There are other technologies besides that, but they are very similar, most of them. My advice on that is this: if your contest is large enough, in other words, if by people just being there with their name and their picture, if nobody could really tell who the judges were, I wouldn't even bother with that. However, if you got sort of a small contest and it's pretty obvious who the judges would be if they had their name and their face there, then yeah, you could have them set things up so that they change their name to just Judge 1, Judge 2, whatever, or just Judge or some weird name, you know, Ronald Reagan, whatever, and then turn off their video, and then nobody sees and knows who they are. But if it's a small club where you've got, say, 15 members and you got, say, 5 contestants and you know who the other people are, then you pretty much know who the judges are going to be anyway. That's why they say in the rule book, you know, remain anonymous as practical. And some clubs, I mean, think about it. When we did it in person and the ballot counters are walking by and picking up the ballots from the judges, it's not too hard to figure out who the judges are. So just do your best. And if you want to do that and blank out the video and that's perfectly fine. I know that when we had the district competition last spring, it was all online, but we had like 175 people there. Nobody could tell who the judges were. So we just told everybody, just go ahead and get on with your name and just like everybody else and your picture. And some people stopped their videos, some people didn't. Nobody could tell who the judges were. So it just depends on your situation.
So I have a question about labeling yourself as Judge 1 or Judge 2. you would then be obligated to leave that name up and never have your video on for the entirety of the contest.
Correct.
You cannot mingle with people during the break or at the end, because then everybody knows who you are.
Exactly. But if you're going to do that, make sure you pick Judge 1 because you want to be in first place.
Okay, I do. Excuse me. Last question. Should you have a backup timer?
I'm going to phone a friend on this one. Should you have a backup timer? Nothing particularly wrong with that. You can have 3 or more timers. If you have 2, the likelihood that they both lose the connection or something goes wrong with both of them is small, not impossible. So if you had a backup timer and you lost both of the main ones, then sure, then you've got somebody, because if you don't, and you as the chief judge aren't doing the timing yourself, which you probably aren't because you got plenty of other things to pay attention to. Yeah, and then basically you've lost the time and you have to guess, and that's not a good picture at all. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with having a backup timer. If you've got the people, if you can get them and somebody's willing to do that, sure, no problem. You could have one of your backup judges be a backup timer too. I wouldn't do that because then they're trying to pay too much attention on different things, but yeah, no problem with backup timer. But if you go through rehearsals and nobody ever loses a connection, it's unlikely they're both going to lose a connection. So it's probably not that important unless you're just extremely paranoid.
So to add to that, let me add that I always like to have 2 people running stopwatches so
Right.
that there's two people with the time, even if only one of them is required and the other one flashing cards. If one of them forgot to start their clock, or if they lose connection, at least there's another stopwatch going at the same time.
Yeah, and a lot of people will use their phone, but some people will actually use a stopwatch or some other timing device on their computer. But yeah, you're exactly right, Jim. Both timers have to run the time, either because they're going to put up signals at 5 minutes and so forth, or because they're going to record the time length. So they both have to do that. And again, I totally agree with the question. Nothing wrong with having multiple people do that. Sometimes I have even, as chief judge, gone ahead and recorded the time myself, just as a paranoid check to make sure that we didn't have something weird happening to the time, entering a time warp, whatever. And so, yeah, most of that's probably not necessary, but if it does happen, you definitely want to have a backup.
David,
Yes,
back in the
Renee.
day, whenever any contest that I was at or different people that I know were at, every contest, both timers had a stopwatch or the phone to keep time. But I've also been at contests where somebody said they needed 2 timers and they said, no, it's only 1 required, so we only have 1. So that's something I think best practices are that both timers have some way of keeping time, whether it's the stopwatch or the phone.
Yes, and
That's mine.
And I agree. And that's exactly what the rule book says. You have to have 2 timers. And they can't, unless they're sitting together using the same stopwatch.
I know.
In an online contest, obviously they're not. They both have to be, you're right, they both have to be tracking
know.
time. So
But
that's the
people
rule.
read it differently sometimes.
Well, to me, when I look at that rule, there's no way around it. You have to do that. It is a rule. It is a
And
best practice, but it's more than bad. It's a rule.
There's one other thing that doesn't come up very often, but I was at a contest, I think it was 2 years ago, and it was an area contest, and we got there. Luckily, one of the trios was there, and they knew this one club only had 7 members paid, and they hadn't paid 8. So we had a break in there that we had to check everything out. But the person who was checking on who paid was looking under Club Central and put down, I think, submit payment, and it brought up everybody that hadn't paid, and they just thought that was enough, whatever. But Yeah, that happened just a couple years ago in an area contest. So that's something is very important when it gets down to it.
It must
Yeah, I
be
didn't.
paid member of a paid club, and a paid club is one that has 8 or more members paid.
Yes,
Right.
but
Read
if
the
they only
rule
have
book.
7, they're not qualified.
Read the rule book carefully. Things like that, if you don't catch it, if you don't read carefully and understand, you might even have to go back to some other documents on the TI website to understand that's 8 people. Because if you don't know that, then you're not going to get that right. Exactly. That's why it's important to look at the details. And it's a good idea to send the information to speechcontests@toastmasters.org at least a week in advance, because sometimes it takes a long time for them to get back and say, here are my contestants, here are my judges. Can you tell me their eligibility information? And they will tell you. And if they tell you that they're eligible, then you're okay. If
Was
they
there
tell you
not,
that you're not, then they aren't.
wasn't there a link at some point called the eligibility checker?
Yes, there is. But if you're not an area director or division director, you can't get much out of it, basically.
Okay.
So
Can't you check the club eligibility though, as far as the number of members by the distinguished performance reports for those?
you sort of can, but they say on the distinguished performance reports, the DCP, they always talk about this isn't necessarily going to be exactly with these other records because of the way the systems interact. So you can't totally 100% guaranteed depend on that. Sometimes it's not accurate, is what I'm saying, and they don't validate that they are accurate.
But club officers can look on Club Central, not just area directors and division directors.
True, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, talk to your officers, talk to your area director, talk to somebody up the line will be able to get the information you need if you can't access it.
But on the bottom line is you have to have somebody that knows and has the qualifications to do that. Because
Right.
at that particular time, the treasurer of the club, the president of the club insisted that they had paid and that it was on TI's website. But when some of us went in there and looked at it, they hadn't paid.
Right.
So I mean, that's something, somebody has to know what they're doing to be able to do it.
Yeah, so as chief judge, contest chair, contest master, take care of the details or you could get bitten in the end. And that's a perfect example from Renee right there.
Especially for the district contest, you must be paid to the next term for the district contest, because that's in May.
We don't have to worry about that till that, because that's in May.
Well, I just want to remind people, that's the one contest
Right.
that
It's
you
no-
have to have paid for the next term.
Right.
not-
It's no good to be paid up through April 30th at that point.
You have
Because
to
the
qualify
contest is
all
the
the way
next day.
through.
Right. Well, that concludes our training. If you do have any other questions, I'll be glad to try to field them. I don't know all the answers. I might have to pass it to someone else, but we will get answers if you need them. And we'll do our best to help you. If you need help with your contest, please don't hesitate to ask. We can help. And if you're needing people, if you need help with processes, whatever it is, we'll do our best to work with you and make sure things happen. We've done it in the past and we can do it again. I thank Christine for curating this. I'm going to hand it back to her in just a second. And I also thank Jean for putting this team together who's worked on all these things. And I thank each of you for taking on the role of chief judge. Good luck. Christine, take it away.
Thank you, David. I have one more question and I will be happy to answer it.
I thought we had the last
What
question.
are the differences in duties between the contest chair and the contest master? Well, you only have to come next Tuesday at 7 p.m. to the contest master training. We had contest chair training last Tuesday. Contest master training will actually cover a lot of the details that involve the contest chair, because contest chair and contest master are often the same person. So please feel free to come next Tuesday and learn about contest master and contest chair. With that, I will say thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and we hope to see you next week at Contest Master Training.
Yay.
Same channel, same
Thank you.